Good evening, everybody. Welcome to an evening with Carl Hiaasen and Rand Richards Cooper. I'm Jennifer LaRue. I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the Mark Twain House and Museum. And I say here, I'm actually down the street a little bit in my little home studio, but we consider that an extension of the Mark Twain House these days. So glad to see so many of you here, and I will say this is an event we've been waiting for a long time. It was supposed to happen in person at one time, and we all know what happened with that. So I'm grateful that so many of you stuck with us and are joining us here for this virtual event. And I'm especially grateful to Carl and Rand for being here under those circumstances as well. I'm not going to talk for too very long, but I do have a few little housekeeping matters to go over with you, particularly those of you who are new to Crowdcast. I see that many of you are already active in the chat, and I love seeing that. Some of you began long before the program. Know that that continues after the program ends. This program is being recorded, and you can watch it over again anytime you like. And if you make friends in the chat, you can keep chatting with people in perpetuity. So enjoy that and keep that going. However, we are going to have a Q&A at the end of our evening, and if you have a question for either Carl or Rand, please address it in that Ask a Question section that's at the bottom of your screen. That makes it a lot easier for us to keep track of the questions. You can also upvote a question if you see something that you're also curious about. So give that a try. You can use the link that I will repost in the chat to purchase a copy of Squeeze Me through our museum store. That's a signed copy, and know that your purchase benefits the Mark Twain House and Museum, so we appreciate that very much. Speaking of which, the Mark Twain House and Museum is very grateful for your support through coming to this program tonight. I know you all paid a registration fee to be here, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate that support. The museum is a private nonprofit organization, so we're not federally or state funded. We earn all of our income and revenue, and that's been obviously curtailed in recent months, though we have been open for tours since mid-June. And I'm really excited to tell you, I learned today that our ghost tours, the ones we had scheduled, all sold out, and we had to put more on the calendar. So things are really looking good in that area. However, COVID has been rough on the museum, as it has been on so many organizations. We staff are furloughed a day a week, for instance, myself included, and I'd like to point out there's a lot of staff in the audience tonight, and they including our executive director, Peter Roos, we're all in that same boat. So why am I telling you all this? Because if you are able in any way, shape, or form to give us a little bit more support, be it $1, $5, $50, or whatever you can spare in addition to your registration fee this evening, know that that will be deeply, deeply appreciated by the staff and trustees of the museum. And an easy way to do that is to click that greenish long button right below our faces here that says your support is vital to the Mark Twain House and Museum, and truer words were never spoke. So thank you for whatever you can do to help us out in that regard. I want to point out that we have another opportunity coming up very soon, our gala, which is going virtual this year. It's November 6th at 8 p.m. I've put a link in the chat to that. Rand is our host for the evening, and it's going to be terrific. Rand, we have so many wonderful people who are making presentations. We have Jimmy Buffett, Brad Paisley, Jodi Picoult.
Not just presentations, singing.
Some of them are singing. No, it's going to be awesome. Ron Chernow, who wrote, of course, the biography of Hamilton, on which the musical is based, and our friend and trustee, David Baldacci, among others. So it's free. So join us, please. And there are going to be all kinds of awesome things that you can bid on during the evening. So a good time's going to be had by all. And again, Rand will be there with us. One more thing before I sign off and come back for the Q&A at the end. I want to invite you to another very special event, which is happening tomorrow evening, which is our presentation of the Mark Twain American Voice in Literature Award to this year Ocean Vuong for his stunning debut novel, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. Again, David Baldacci, our trustee, who is the benefactor of that award, will be presenting it virtually to Ocean, who has prepared a reading, a pre-recorded reading, but it's beautiful. And so I invite you to come join us for that. It is free also. So tonight's program, being a Mark My Words event, is sponsored, as always, by the Wish You Well Foundation, and our media sponsor is Connecticut Public, WNPR. We have another sponsor very special this evening, though, and that is Bank of America. So thank you very much, Bank of America, for your support, not only of tonight's program, but actually also of tomorrow's American Voice in Literature ceremony. So we're very grateful for all of that. So the theme of our gala is the fact that we refer to the Mark Twain House as a writer's home and a home for writers. And we're always anxious and eager to add more writers to our circle and make them know that the Twain House is their writer's home. And tonight, we hope that in addition to Rand, who's been in our circle for some time, that we'll be able to add Carl Hiaasen to that family of writers who feel that way about the Twain House. So I'm going to briefly introduce our two speakers tonight. Rand Richards Cooper, is the author of 2 works of fiction, and his writing has appeared in The New Yorker, Harper's, Esquire, The Atlantic, and Best American Short Stories. A longtime contributor to Bon Appetit and The New York Times, Rand lives right around the corner here in Hartford with his family. He's a contributing editor at Commonweal Magazine and writes a column in Our Midst for Hartford Magazine. Carl Hiaasen was born and raised in Florida. He's the author of 14 previous novels, including the bestsellers Bad Monkey, Lucky You, Nature Girl, Sick Puppy, and Star Island, as well as 6 best-selling children's books, Hoot, Flush, Scat, Chomp, Skink, and Squirm. Those are fun to say. His most recent work of nonfiction is Assume the Worst, a collaboration with the artist Roz Chast. So we're delighted to have them both here this evening. Everybody, please join me in giving a round of applause and welcome to Rand and Carl. Thank you, guys, and we'll see you back at the Q&A.
Carl, it's a thrill for me to be here tonight. A lot of my friends, I've gotten more emails from friends in the past few days than I typically get in 2 weeks because you have so many readers out there. Let me just give you and our audience a bit of an overview for how I want to get through this part of it before they chime in with their questions. I want us to discuss first your new novel, Squeeze Me, and in particular, perhaps the role of humor in satire. Then I'd like to move briefly back to your career in journalism, a few questions about writing, and then somewhere in there we'll weave in some thoughts about the state of Florida, of which you are a lifelong resident, and its relation to the state of the U.S. as a whole. Then I will get out of the way of your fans. So for those in our audience who have not yet read Squeeze Me, and when was it actually released, Carl?
The end of August.
The end of August. So I think many people in the audience have read it, but some won't have. I'm going to avoid some choice spoilers. But let me give a short description of the novel. Squeeze Me begins with the mysterious disappearance of a 72-year-old dowager, Kiki Pugh, Catherine Pugh Fitzsimmons, from a Palm Beach fundraising gala being thrown by a group you describe as the Gold Coast chapter of the IBS Wellness Foundation, a group globally committed to defeating irritable bowel syndrome. And I would just, as an aside, point out to comic writers how much work an adverb can do by way of making things funny. The group is not just committed to defeating irritable bowel syndrome, it's committed to it's globally committed to defeating it. Sometimes what makes things funny is a little bit mysterious, but that adverb is doing a lot of work. Kiki also belongs to a group of women who worship the President of the United States, whose winter White House is nearby. While this president is never named in Squeeze Me, his Secret Service code name is Mastodon, and he wears a bright orange hairpiece. And the group that Kiki belongs to proudly calls itself the Potussies. Is it Potussies or Potussies?
I like to say Potussies, but yours sounds more elegant.
The Potussies, which is a kind of a portmanteau word that blends POTUS, President of the United States, and pussies, as in grab them by the. The investigation of Kiki Pugh's disappearance, which is really the course of the novel, takes us through rampant reptile adventures, a possibly impinging pandemic, flaming miscues in the presidential tanning salon, cynical presidential demagoguery against undocumented immigrants, and the Potussies serenading their hero with a love song that they themselves have composed titled Big Unimpeachable You. Palace intrigues aplenty at the presidential villa in Florida, which is called Casa Bellicosa. And it all ends in your version of a kind of snakes in Palm Beach event that your narrator calls the Python Apocalypse. Now, in normal times, I don't think one would call this realism, but these are not normal times. So I'm just going to ask you a very basic question: how and when? And by the way, I love the picture of you on the Mark Twain website with the snake coiled around you.
Yeah.
I felt like the cop in your novel who says, "Get that thing away from me." So I want to ask, how and when and why did the idea for this novel first slither into your imagination?
Well, I think part of it was, these things are always sort of psychotherapeutic for writers. When you're writing the kind of stuff that I write, it comes from some dark, disturbing place. But, living in Florida, there's just no shortage of inspiration. And I think the fact that the commander-in-chief has a home in Palm Beach, which is one of the most exclusive areas of all of Florida, one of the wealthiest and most exclusive. And I really wanted to use the pythons for some time, because that's a real thing. And in fact, last week or so, they caught the world record, at least in Florida, a Burmese python, close to 19 feet, which is the one I was holding in that picture. He was sort of a showbiz python, but he was a real Burmese python. He was, I think, only 10 feet. And his name was Bumble. And he's like a red carpet python. So I knew they would find one in Manhattan for me to pose with, and they did. But they're real, and they've sort of eaten and chewed their way through the Everglades, and they have moved out of the Everglades. So in my own twisted way, I thought, well, why not Palm Beach? Why not the winter social season? And why not when the president and the first family are there? It's just part of it is fantasy fulfillment. I admit this, but part of it was that it was entirely plausible. These things swim a long way. They're almost impossible to contain or control or kill. And so this is like a real thing that Floridians deal with. Well, why not since the president in the novel, as well as in real life, is now officially a Florida resident, as you know, it didn't seem that far-fetched to me.
Would you say you started with the idea of Trump or the idea of the snake?
I don't want to. I think it's disrespectful to the snakes at this point to link the two ideas. I think that all the novels I've ever written are set in a contemporary, real time, and the novels to some extent have always reflected some social issues and some political issues. And I mean, I did a whole novel about a slimy lobbyist, political lobbyist. There are politicians that pop in and out of all the books, but this was the first time, I think, because of just the bizarre nature of the news cycle and the things that were really happening. And that became the challenge, Rand, was because usually in satire, you're trying to crank up reality a notch or two and stay ahead of it with the edge and with the humor. But every day you look at the headlines and something more outlandish has happened in real life with the administration we have right now, with the politics we have right now. So it became almost like a masochistic challenge to try to stay one step ahead. And I was able, because the time of the turnaround time was compressed. I was able to work in pandemic stuff as well.
I assume that the book was started before the pandemic.
Yeah, it was.
How did you had to sort of retrofit things?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you work, but I'm rewriting up until the minute I surrender the novel to the editor. I mean, I don't want to let it go. There's not a sentence I haven't read probably 100 times in every book. And so I was going back and just tweaking and just what you referred to earlier, the thing, reading a sentence and saying, God, would this adverb make it funnier? Or would a comma there make the pacing better or sharper. You know, that's the sort of thing I torture myself with. So I was going back anyway constantly. And then when this hit the fan, the pandemic, I realized that a lot of the social situations, for instance, the world of charity galas it goes on in Palm Beach, which is really quite a place, would all be affected by that. So then I went back and I put in, you know, Waterford Crystal hand sanitizer dispensers, because that's what they would do.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I noticed that, which fits seamlessly with the part of your novel that is a sort of satire of conspicuous consumption. So for you to slip the Waterford Crystal hand sanitizers in every hallway is sort of doing double duty there. It's both contributing to that satire, but it's letting us know that I assume, I infer from the novel, we're sort of in between pandemics. The time frame of the novel is not entirely clear. Has Trump been reelected? You leave that fuzzy.
Well, I had to, you know, because we don't know what's going to happen, and so also it's Florida, and it for all we know, the election could come down. God help us, it could come down to Florida again. So all of that, and if you're a Floridian, you live. This is the knot in the stomach that you live with every 4 years. Is that ever since Gore versus Bush, or Bush versus Gore, or whatever the hell it was. Ever since that year, 2000, we live with the nightmare. Please, God, let it be another state this year. Let it be Wisconsin. This year, we're counting on Georgia to screw things up worse than we do. They seem like they're the front runner right now. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania could screw things up. It looks like they'll be counting ballots for the next couple of years. So we hold out hope that we are not going to screw things up as badly as another state does. But all that's playing on when you're writing and you're trying to write and keeping up with the news events and keeping realistic with the news events. It is a tightrope.
You you mentioned the phrase that part of the challenge was cranking up reality a notch. Some observer said recently that Trump has killed satire. It's a challenge to crank up a reality a notch when the actual president seems like a satirical creation of a writer. I'm wondering if you, as a satirist, consider someone like Trump, or actually Trump, a boon or a bane for a satirist.
I think it's been challenged. I think all comedy writers are challenged right now because he is such, you know, he larger than life doesn't begin to describe it. And he'll say one thing more outrageous, you know, more you know, incendiary than the next. Nothing that you invented when you're writing a character like that. It's just like writing a monologue for Colbert or for Jimmy Kimmel or somebody. You're waiting. Please, dear God, don't let him say or do anything between the time we tape and the time it airs at 11:30, because it'll screw up. Because there's just one. Because all he does is watch TV and get on his Twitter account. He does nothing, and but beyond that, there's not much going on except him just, you know, doing that. So yeah, I don't think he's an easy person in this novel. In Squeeze Me, I mean, he's not center stage.
Right.
It's
he only speaks a couple of times.
And when he does, it resonates because, you know, especially the ranting about the immigrants, because one of the things that does happen in South Florida, and it happened about 2 weeks ago, is there are just boatloads of immigrants coming in at night, most of them from Bimini, trying to get into the country, you know, migrants, and just trying to get to a better place. And it's been happening, you know, I don't know, 40 years. But right in some of the prime real estate in South Florida, these boats in the middle of the night, and they make an incredibly dangerous passage. And there's usually a smuggler who's running the boat, and he'll either dump them in the water offshore, or he'll run the boat in and then take off and leave them there. And they've spent everything they've ever been able to make their whole life to get to this country. And it's a little different from the Mexican border situation. You can't put a wall around Florida. But I always thought of the ironic confluence of them making that night. Usually it's rough and it's miserable, making that run from Bimini and landing in Palm Beach within the sight of these incredible mansions, and that's their first look at America. Then they hit the shore, and so I wanted that scene in there, and I also wanted some of what's really happening in terms of the xenophobia in this country. I wanted that. That's what, if you write satire, that's what you have to do. It has to be about something.
Well, and one of the important characters, although he's not often in the novel, but he's crucial, is Diego, who is an undocumented immigrant from, is it Guatemala or Honduras?
I think it was Guatemala.
Guatemala, and he
maybe Honduras. Oh, I forget.
He's charged. He becomes a suspect in the disappearance of this socialite, and the whole issue is then demagogued by the president, and his supporters create all of these fake news about a terrorist group that is run by Diego. All of it's completely phony, and once again, yes, this is satire, but it's almost uncomfortably close to what would really happen in the current environment. But so I'm struck by that again and again. That yes, I'm what I'm reading is outrageous and ridiculous, but it's only a slight shade away from where we actually are.
The speech that Mastodon gives after this kid's been arrested, and his mistake was coming ashore on the same night in a boatload of people the same night that this socialist, who was one of the Potussis, disappears, right? That's the only thing. And so he, of course, becomes a prime suspect. But the speech that the character in the book, Mastodon, gives is not that far off the speech that Trump himself gave about the rapists and bad people pouring in from Mexico. It's really not all that.
Absolutely. No.
And but when you're recreating something like that in print, the words seem even. You've got a character who is supposed to be, have a clownish quality to him, but there's also menace there, and it's hard to balance all that. And when your job is sort of to make people laugh, but you still want it to be, as I said, about something real and important.
Your book, while the president is not named, it's obvious who it is, and your book purveys a fair amount of scandalous, sort of inside scoopy presidential revelations. We do get quite an insight into some of the private foibles of the president and the first lady. Her Secret Service code name is Mockingbird. He's Mastodon. So Mastodon downs 20 Dr. Peppers a day. He eats egg McMuffins by the bagful. His tanning bed has a test pilot who constantly has to test out his tanning bed for him and make sure it's working properly. He pops Adderall the whole time. There's also rampant infidelity by both the president and the first lady. Romance.
I don't see her as. Yes, it's infidelity, but she's not like picking off a different guy every night.
Same kind of infidelity.
But again, that came from just thinking, when you watch the news footage of the real president, the real first lady, she has the most haunted, lonely look.
Yes.
Any first lady that I have ever seen in my lifetime. She just looks wretchedly miserable every step of the way. And you think about loneliness, and as a novelist, you take some image like that and you run with it. Okay, she's lonely. She's alone most of the time. They really don't hang out together. So what do you do? Maybe you fall in love with one of the Secret Service guys.
A lawyer friend of mine emailed to ask this. He said, "Well, I'm certain many of Hiaasen's characters over the decades have been inspired by real-life Floridians. Squeeze Me specifically identifies both Donald and Melania and uses what I assume is a fictional affair between Melania and the Secret Service agent as a plot point. I wonder whether that choice gave him any pause." I think he means in terms of, I don't know, liability, becoming an object of a presidential Twitter storm. I don't know. Have you ever been sued?
I got to tell you, I'd be frickin' thrilled. It would put me in such good company if he went off the rails. But you know, he's got. Look at my book didn't come out. I think Woodward's book came out shortly after mine. He had way bigger problems than some. And also, honestly, look at the guy. When is the last time he's read a novel? He can't even read his national security briefing every morning. He ain't going to read a 100,000-word novel. So I'm not that worried about it. And I couldn't give a rat's ass whether he likes the book or not. It's not my job to make anybody happy. This is a fictional character, and I don't even know he would get the nuance of it.
No, I mean, someone would give him, you know, a 30-second summary of it, but it would be an accomplishment for you to be singled out that way.
I would like he would sell a shitload of books for me if he did that, and I think someone's probably told him don't even. He's got so much he's juggling and so much he's obsessing about now. This is not even a fly. And secondly, you know, I mean, this is first of all, you know, everybody in government who is an elected person is a public official, and Trump's the first one to absolutely savage someone's reputation based on nothing other than they disagree with Trump. That's what he does. Look what he did to Fauci in the last few days. And then he's got this clown Scott Atlas who has no infectious disease experience, telling everyone masks don't work. Now, how'd you like to have that guy on your side? You might as well go to like Gallagher and ask him for his while he's smashing a watermelon. What do you think? Should I wear a mask or not, Gallagher? You might as well do that than ask these idiots that Trump's got around him.
Carl, I'm interested in the relationship between humor and anger, mediated through satire. Your novels, if you ask any fan of yours, what's point one about a Carl Hiaasen novel, they say it's hilarious. And I laughed frequently in this novel, and I don't laugh very often out loud when I'm reading. I remember going way back to Kingsley Amos's novels, and when I was in college and reading them and laughing out loud. So I sort of have, you know, my favorite lines when one of the Potussies is asked to come to the morgue to identify her friend's remains. She's warned that it's going to be gruesome. Do you remember her response?
Yeah, you'd say it. I don't have it in front of me, but she said, how can it be worse than watching my husband's vasectomy?
My first husband's vasectomy. I sat in on my first husband's vasectomy. How could it possibly be worse? And you write the single most enjoyably unflattering description of our president ever through his wife's point of view. There's a scene where she's looking at him, I think, sitting on the edge of his bed, and she inwardly feels a sense of almost overwhelming physical loathing. And you write this: his feet were like moist loaves, the tiny toes appearing more decorative than functional. She found it hard to believe this was the same man she'd married. He looked like a different person now, as if someone had put a fire hose up his ass and inflated him with meringue. Also, it gives, I think, listeners an idea of the level of raucous rowdiness of your prose. So there's a lot of fun in reading this book. And I guess I want to ask you, like, is it fun writing it? Did you have fun? Are there moments when you're sitting there laughing at your own stuff? Is writing a book fun?
Dave Barry is a close friend of mine, and we've talked about this because I read his stuff and laugh out loud. We talked about it, and both of us describe the process of writing humor is so grim and so intense. And you know this, Rand, that you can, if you're off by one word, just the rhythm of a sentence is off, or it's the wrong adjective, it just falls flat. It doesn't work. And comedy writers know this. You write a joke and it kills one night, and the next night in the club you change one thing and nobody laughs. So you're on this tight wire about it. When I'm writing it, there's a voice in my head that'll say, that works, that's funny. I know that's funny, but I'm never smiling, I'm never laughing. I'm just rereading it, tweaking it, trying to, you've got the plot to move along, you've got dialogue that you agonize over because that too can fall flat. It's freaking torture when you're doing it. I am basically miserable while I'm doing it. But at the end, if you know something's working, that there's just something you, after years of doing it, tells you, yeah, okay, that I got that right. That's the right note I wanted to hit with that paragraph or that section, you know. But I got to say, I'm not laughing. And you know, I always said I come out of my office looking like I just walked away from a funeral. That's usually how I feel at the end of the day.
Just because of the challenges of writing, or because of the topic that you're engaging here?
You know, it's a little different from writing. What's a lot different from writing like thrillers. And the first 3 books I wrote with a friend of mine when I was young, they were traditional thrillers, and we had, you know, you have to plot them out. You have outlines, and we're doing different sections and different characters. Everything had to be choreographed kind of ahead. This kind of stuff is different because when people pick up something of yours and expect it to be funny, and because they want to laugh, and God knows everybody needs a laugh now, you just feel a lot of pressure, especially if you're going through a part of your life where, in your personal life, where nothing is funny. And that was true for me while I was writing. It's for part of the book. It's certainly the first part of the book. There was just a lot of heavy stuff going on. Yet I had to walk in that office every day and sit down, and here's a scene. I knew that this scene was coming up, and I knew it had to be sharp and good and funny. And so that made it, you know, you just put, I think if you're doing it right, it's misery. If you're doing this stuff right, you're pretty miserable.
You know, some of the realities and the issues that you're writing involve a great deal of misery for many people and for the environment. Well, I want to get onto that. But, you know, I wonder about the role of laughter and the meaning of a novel that converts so much outrage into a kind of merriment. You know, we mentioned Dave Barry, and I think of Dave Barry as he's a satirist, but it's almost a sheer joy in the absurdity of people. With John Oliver, whom we were talking about off before, the default tone is caustic, and a sort of caustic overdrive with a lot of F-bombs. But you know, for me, about halfway through Trump's term, I stopped laughing about any of it, and I went into sort of tearing my hair out mode, with alternating with avoidance and denial. And your novel is full of, if you can tick off the issues where this government has acted abysmally: inequality, COVID, deportations, race baiting, despoliation of the environment. And yet the mood of your novel is one of really rollicking mirth and merriment. I read Janet Maslin's review in the Times. She loved the novel, but she praised it as wild escapism. And
I wish.
And your own jacket blurb promises that Carl Hiaasen can brighten even the darkest of days. So I guess my question is this what the satirist sets out to do, to brighten the darkest of days? How do you balance the goal of being an entertainer, which your novel is a real entertainment, and of brightening our dark days with the reality of all this outrageous stuff swirling around us? It seems to me not right that Squeeze Me is escapism, but it's partly escapism. I don't know. It's not.
I wish
in there you can find it.
I don't think. I wish it were far enough from reality to be escapism. But I think that point she was making was that it's an escape from the 24-hour news cycle of which can be just full of despair and full of gloom, and really, as you said, you want to pull your hair out. And I'm in the news business now. I always have the column and that's a once a week hit, and you can work out some of what you're talking about, because you can take your shot and it's in the paper the next day. You know what I'm saying? And so that's a release. So then I could throttle back when I went to the novel and think about it as a novelist. Think about the structure. You think about the character development, the pacing. You can do all that and still work through the same emotions. But it was nice to have that outlet of the column, because if something so outrageous and so corrupt was going on, I could get it out of my system, be in the paper, and then I would look at the big picture. But I know what you're saying, and it's hard. I just know from my own feelings the last couple of years with what's going on that I think people desperately need to laugh. And you and I were talking about John Oliver and Colbert and a lot of those people. I tune in. You know what reminds me of is when I came out of college right in the middle of Watergate, when Woodward and Bernstein were breaking those stories in the Washington Post. And at that time, we thought the Republic was in danger, that Nixon was going to run this country into the ground and defy the Supreme Court, defy Congress. We thought, we never seen anything like it. We thought it was the end of the Republic as we know it. And at night, I remember, at night watching Johnny Carson every night, watching his monologue. And I remember, and he wasn't famously political, but I remember when he started going after Nixon. And they say, it's maybe apocryphal, but the mood of the country changed. Nixon and all of those guys knew they were in trouble when even Johnny Carson was making jokes. And they seem like lighthearted jokes, like you and I are talking. It seemed like escapism, but they were right on target. He had great writers, and they were right on the money. And that was a big turning point in that whole the whole Watergate thing, was that when you have people who are supposedly comedians or comics who are now coming after you.
Then I also thought of just the role of humor in confronting and responding to tyranny. And there was some, it's too strong a word obviously to use with Trump, but some columnist recently said, all of you liberals tearing your hair out and writing these screeds, no, the thing to do is to make fun of him.
That's what I usually do.
In fact, humor deflates. Liberals have been unable to deflate this persona, but humor deflates, and I feel that your novel really lets a great deal of air out of the bloated effigy. And
now this is fitting because this is the Mark Twain House event, but Twain was one of the first American writers who knew, just from reading other writers as well, that there is no more deadly weapon in politics than satire. There's nothing more cutting, more lacerating, more effective than making fun of some over bloated ego and bringing them down to size with humor. You can stand on a soapbox on a corner all day long to scream and yell about what's going on, but when you take them down that way, and a lot of it is like what John Oliver does sometimes too. That's what they can't stand. That's what drives them nuts. I grew up listening to Spike Jonze's recording of Der Führer's Face, and it that's that silly song, we hire right in Der Führer's face. It bespoke a certain American insouciance in the face of humorless tyranny. That's a strain of American wisdom that Twain was really right in the center of, to be irreverent in the face of abusive power. I guess I take your novel in my certainty that this is not mere escapism. I think you're hitting targets with humor at a moment when that's desperately needed. Well, I had a friend of mine say to me years ago, another writer, said to me, I don't know, I've probably written 4 or 5 novels at the time, and she said to me, well, when are you going to write a serious novel? And I said, well, what I write is deadly serious for me. There's nothing light about it for me. That's true of everyone I've ever written. As comic as some of the setup scene and as some cinematic as some of the scenes might be from a humorous point of view, there's a point to all of it. And the great thing about having a fan base, I hate using that word, but having readers like I do, is that they get it. They laugh for the right reasons. You know what I'm saying? There's a difference between just laughing at something that's inherently funny, like someone slipping on a banana peel. And there's another about reading a line, reading a scene that may not have a punchline in it, but it's still funny for that reason. And they get it. And that's been the most rewarding thing about what I do, is hearing they know, they get it. And they know what the point of it all is. It's very hard to even write straight comic bang bang humor. That's hard as hell to do, but it is not easy to construct a whole novel with character when you're trying to get somewhere. You're trying to not make a point, but you're trying to put something on display that's happening in this country that needs to end.
You were a daily journalist for 10 years at the beginning of your career, roughly, at the Herald.
Yeah, I went to Herald, and I worked at a small newspaper when I got out of school. Yeah.
I wonder what. Presumably, you were writing very different kinds of things in these novels, in a very different idiom, very different tone. What sort of preparation for being a novelist of the kind you are was journalism?
Well, I mean, working in Miami in the 70s and 80s, I mean, it was the best news town for a young journalist you can imagine. It was also scary. There was this great sadness. There was violence. There was just incredible racial tension, and much of it, sadly, hasn't changed for the reasons for it. There was unarmed black men getting shot, and then there was disturbances in the street, and this was going back a long time. It was an incredible education, and at the time, I started as a city desk, reporter, street reporter, and then moved in on the investigations team. I was on the Sunday magazine we had for a while with Dave was there, and then on the investigations team for several years. And that was probably the most important stuff I've ever done. And I've written columns in college, but then having the background, being out on the street, and just being in the newsroom and seeing what was coming in, I don't think I would have been the same kind of novelist. When I was in college and when I was young, I worked on a couple novels sort of as a ghostwriter, and they both got published. One of them got made into a successful movie, and so it gave me some confidence that I could put together. I could make the long run on a novel instead of the 400 word, 500 word newspaper story. That I could do it. But I thought once I was in the newsroom, I'd never have time. And the only way I made time was I worked, all day there, went home at night, worked on these books. And I probably looking back, some cost to my family at the time. It was just kind of an insane schedule, but I knew I wanted to be a writer. I think it's no accident that so many novelists come from a background of journalism. I don't think it's an accident at all. You learn so much about how things really work. You learn about political corruption. You learn about crime firsthand. Sadly, you learn about all this stuff, but you also learn how people really speak. If you're writing dialogue, you learn how people really speak. You learn how cops really talk, how emergency room doctors really talk, how drug dealers talk, how smugglers talk. And you know that they don't talk in complete, perfect sentences. So when you sit down to write the novel, you write dialogue. And Elmore Leonard was one of the best at it, that the way people really sound and the way they talk. And all that stuff is just really enhanced by the journalism and just the experience of it.
Was it difficult to move from a kind of writing where you would be punished for making things up to a kind of writing where you had to make everything up?
I couldn't have picked a more different discipline, because especially on the investigations team, we had a tremendous investigations team at the Herald, and Jim Savage was my editor. Every word of everything we wrote not only went through a number of editors, it went through lawyers. There couldn't be a shred of your personal opinion, despite what the pundits seem to think. They've never worked in a real newsroom. You get taken apart line by line, and everything in there better be factual, and then you better stay out of it yourself. So I went from that discipline of the investigations team, even though you knew what you were writing about, you knew somebody was crooked, you knew you were after something. Your job was just to put it in the paper and let readers decide. You go from that to you're inventing your own character. The greatest part about it was you get to write with novels. You get to write your own ending, because most of the time in newspaper work or any kind of journalism, there's not a happy ending. Most of the time, there's not. And this is just an old saying, but they didn't send you to the airport when the plane landed safely.
So my question about that, and I know I'm borrowing from listeners' time, but I hope that they and you will be able to stay a little bit longer for the conversation. But this novel has, relatively speaking, a happy ending. Many of your novels do, and I'm wondering, is that sort of a concession to the genre, or
No.
or are you a sort of, despite the great amount of pessimism and cynicism for obvious and good reasons that's front loaded in your books, are you a sort of closet optimist? And if so, what are the sources of that optimism?
I would never, I'm Norwegian. We can never be optimistic. That ain't gonna happen. But I think I like stories to end a certain way. I don't like ambiguity. I want the right people to still be standing on stage at the end, and I want the bad people to be gone. And you have that great luxury of controlling the cast of characters. And I also think there's enough gloom on any news website you go to that you don't need another dose of it at the end of a novel. I don't think you get points for being that, grimly realistic and having your best characters, destroyed at the end. That's never appealed to me, and especially with the kids' books I write, I just don't. I like. Here's what you want. Here's what I've always wanted: is I want people to turn the last page of the book with a smile on their face, and I want to get the note right. I want to hit the note. And I am not a musician, but I would compare it to if you're and one of my kids is, but you compare it to the last note of a composition, the last chord on a piano, or the last chord of a last guitar lick. You know what note you want to hit. And if you hit it, everybody's happy. And your job is not to try and make everybody happy. Your job is to make them feel that was worth it. That was worth the whole trip. That you finished on the same level that you started. That's what you want.
I have there are many other questions I'd like to ask, but I just have two last questions for you. I'm sacrificing at least half of the questions. We would go on for 3 hours if I had my way.
My fault.
Your writing might be described as environmentally engaged, humorous crime fiction with a strong element of social satire. And by the way, I would think that would be a unique description for a writer in America. It would pinpoint you and you only. But it's the same critique that your novels, this novel and others, put forward, essentially, of corrupt capitalism, the excesses of the wealthy, and the effect on the environment. We haven't been able to talk about that much, but it's crucial to your work. This same critique might yield a very different kind of writing by a very different kind of writer. Sure. Someone dour and damning, like a Wendell Berry, or someone like a Bill McKinnon, a sort of citizen Cassandra. I'm thinking back toward when you were a journalist, looking forward to writing books. Why did you choose the particular mode and mood that you did, or does it choose you? Which comes first, the subject or the urge to commit satire?
I think it chooses me, and it's sort of people. This is why a lot of screenwriters have had such trouble. I've had so many screenplays written and only a couple of movies made, but because much of the humor in the novels comes from the narrative tone, and it's a point of view
right.
And that is, scary. It's scary, but that's the way I look at the world, and that's the way I think. So it isn't, and it's really the same narrative view that's in the kids' books too. And it's just occurs to me as I see things and I encounter things, that's how I spin it. It's not that part doesn't take that much effort from me. I'm not creating a new way of looking at it. It's just the way I look at life. And I think I looked at that way when I went into journalism. Oddly enough, this very young guy right out of school, I already had that point of view, and I was already angry. I was already pissed off about what was happening to where I grew up in South Florida, and just paving it and damming and digging the Everglades out, and the rampant engine of greed that really was Florida then, was at the politics, still is. So that never, I was probably pissed off about that since I was 6 years old and saw my first bulldozer come in and take out a creek in a place that I hung out when I was a kid, and I've probably stayed pissed off since then. So I guess it chooses me. I mean, I think every writer needs some sort of fire lit under them one way or another.
I'm struck and squeezed me by a kind of vestigial sense of the sacred that you identify with what elements of the environment in Florida are undamaged. Your main character, Angie Armstrong, who's a wildlife control person and an thoroughly sympathetic character, great character. And she takes some of the animals that she has to deal with who have been killed, and she takes them west somewhere near Lokahatchee or something, and she finds a place to bury them. You don't make much of this, but it sort of serves as this idea of a natural pristine, a kind of sacred, her secret, you call it her secret burial ground. In the foreground, we have all of these forces of corruption, including environmental ones, but some lurking in the background is this sense of the beauty of what's being lost.
Yeah, and I love. I mean, I fell for her too. She's a good character, but I know people that some of that is personal knowledge of people that do that and that have that passion, and our job is to remove all these animals that encounter people, and she takes them out and lets them go in places like that because people, and that's Florida. They've got these companies everywhere. You call them up, you got a critter. You got a raccoon in your piano. They'll come catch the raccoon and take him out the Lokahatchee and let him go. But it's kind of a cool job when you think about it. So yeah, that's all comes from some childhood. I think the pangs of losing childhood places, which is not unique to my experience or
right.
It happens to everybody, no matter where you live. You've seen,
but it's amplified by Florida's predicament, is my sense in your writing.
Well, it's a free for all here, and everything's been for sale since the day they started dredging it.
Carl, I'm going to call Jen in. I know that many fans are chafing at my having taken this long, but I've selfishly wanted to talk with you longer. So why don't I yield to that?
I don't think that anybody has any objections to the way the evening has proceeded. Thank you both so much. So much to think about, and I'm not sure that I was actually expecting so much to think about. So thank you both. We do have some audience questions, though, so I'm going to jump right in. And this one kind of dovetails with what you were just talking about. Carol Wool wants to talk about it. She says, I enjoy the constant through line you use to create awareness and spread knowledge about Florida's ecosystem. What do you believe the impact of your conservation efforts has been?
Well, sadly, I'm not sure that there is any impact. I think that whether you're a journalist or novelist, if you start thinking that you can change the world or change even anything, you're going to be disappointed. The one thing that I will say is that from the feedback I get from readers, that if nothing else, they understand that they're not the only ones who feel the way they do, and they're not the only ones that are angry and are grieving about seeing these places destroyed and whatever's going on in politics. And especially true with the kids' book, because I hear from them. And that gives me a sense like, when you think about it, all it takes is one kid who gets worked up enough about to make this his life, or to make that issue his life's work. And then you've accomplished something. There's no way to measure it. There's no way to know, because in the end, you're just writing for yourself. That's the truth. Is the first person that you're writing, it's a selfish job, because you're writing because you want something to come out a certain way, and you want to make people laugh, but you can't start thinking about, because I've been in newspapers my whole life, and I learned early on, and there were certain investigative series you do and things that have impact, and somebody gets arrested or a project gets stopped because of corruption, and you think, and for that fleeting second, that was an accomplishment. And then the next week, there's some other crook trying to do the same thing, and he's getting away with it. So you never get very high and mighty about it. You just hope that if you do one little good, right thing, and it has any kind of a ripple impact, ripple effect, that's a good thing, and that's not a bad legacy to have. But God, there's not very many writers who who can realistically say, hey, I'm going to write this and it's going to change people's minds. It's going to stop what's going on. I don't think that way.
Well, and I think that you can come across as preachy and moralistic if that's the tack you take. So it seems that you have probably more potential to influence people simply by writing really compelling stories that influence them. And
I mean, that's what that's always been my out, was that all I can do is put it out there. And but these are lessons you learn in a newsroom and lessons you learn with a column as well. And so you're not disappointed at the end of the day. I hear from enough great people, and not all of them agree with everything I write, but there's people who do think and who have have given a lot of attention to something in their lives, and it means that it keeps you going. It really does keep. And I also get letters from prison written in crayon, and that just scares the hell out of me. But so there's both sides.
Right. Well, there's something to that too. Oh, thank you. Allison Keaton asks, I'd like to know his writing process. How do you, Carl, keep the storyline straight? Index cards, writing software, and how do you know where to put the chapter breaks? Is a chapter all happening at once?
No index cards, no outlines. This is going to, and I say that just because I'm not disciplined enough. Also, outlines always felt like handcuffs to me. And I think part of the joy of this is that sometimes characters really surprise you in a good way. And a character that if you plan is only going to be around a few chapters, all of a sudden, and this happened with the character of Skink, the ex-governor who's in this book, but he started out a long time ago in one of the novels, and he was supposed to be a walk-on, and all of a sudden he kind of became the moral compass in this weird little book I did called Double Whammy. And that was a great joy, because if I'd been locked into an outline with a certain cast of characters, I would have never been able to get to know that character. And so I start out with a premise. I tell people it's like I'm going off a diving board. I know that I'm jumping off the diving board, and I know there's a pool down there, but I have no idea if there's any water in it or not. No clue. Uh-huh. So it is stressful in that sense, because I'm really winging it till about 2/3 of the way through the manuscript when I figure out exactly what the ending is going to be.
That makes sense. Well, it's funny because a number of people asked about Skink, and I'll just go with Anne Azevedo's question. Is Skink your revenge alter ego?
I guess in a way he sort of is, because when he started out, he just started saying and doing things that I wished I could say, do, and get away with. He was like, you ever read The Monkey Wrench Gang, Ed Abbey? He was sort of Hayduke, my Hayduke. I hadn't read the book. I had read that book when I wrote it, but people pointed out to me later he was sort of that guy. And I just liked him. And sometimes I like the characters, but I don't really care if I see him again. But that was a character I wanted to see again, just selfishly, and the readers really liked the guy. He lives in the middle of the swamp, and he lives on roadkill. How can you not like the guy that lives on roadkill?
And he lives in a house of books. That he is a house out of books.
The house is built of books, and he's in this novel, and he has some knowledge of pythons as well. He's comfortable. Let's just say he's comfortable among reptiles. I like that, because I grew up with keeping snakes as pets, and so I can dig that. I've got a whole textbook up there on reptile medicine and surgery about this. A good friend of mine wrote it. I guarantee that's not in any bookshelf anywhere. Anyone who's looking at this right now.
Carl, animals are everywhere in your fiction. Why?
I grew up sort of that way in the outdoors and among all that stuff, and I had all kinds of strange pets. I had raccoon. I had a pet possum, for God's sakes. I was the only kid. And that's just sad, a pet possum. That was just the way I grew. And the other thing is, Rand, it's about, in almost all the novels, nature gets some revenge. That's kind of and it's not a conscious theme, but it's just something that always pops up. Nature is incredibly resilient. Florida is resilient. And we've got all this wildlife, and you'll read stories every day about something happening to someone who moved down, and all of a sudden they're confronted with the fact that, yeah, it's all being developed and paved over, but there's a whole lot of critters out there that aren't going away. They aren't going quietly. I was in the Everglades last weekend for 3 days, just gators everywhere. And I always root for, in any situation, for an alligator. I mean, and I apologize to anyone who owns poodles and all this stuff, but I just, there's just something primal and gorgeous about an alligator at work, so I that's just me.
The alligator handout in the current novel is quite hilarious.
Yeah, well, that's what I would do if I caught that.
In human-animal conflicts in your novels, we always root for the animal.
That's the way I am. I mean, I dig it.
Fair enough. Janice Hansen wants to know, who are your favorite writers, Carl?
Oh my gosh, that's a question. It's always tricky to answer. I read, when I'm working on novels, I read almost exclusively nonfiction. But when I do read, I'm a big fan of Martin Amis. And I was a huge Joseph Heller fan, Vonnegut, of course. I learned a lot, I think, and I was a great admirer of Jim Harrison and Tom McGuane, who's also a good friend of mine. 92 in the Shade was written about a fishing guide in Key West. I mean, it was just right in my wheelhouse, and I've said to Tom, and I've said to other writers that, I say this, Karen Russell, who is, I think, a cosmic talent, and I've had the good fortune to meet her in Norwood. I've said the same thing to her. I will not live long enough to write a sentence like I've read in some of her short stories, and I can write until I'm 150 years old. I'll never be able to do what the people like Karen and McGuane can do with a sentence. But you keep trying with every time you set out, or you keep trying to do something nearly that good.
Carl, what about Tom Wolfe? I was reminded again and again in your take on the excesses of extravagant, conspicuous consumption. Just some of the stuff that you furnish Lipid House with. That's where this party is being held.
Yeah.
It includes 19 and a half baths, and I love that half bath. An indoor archery range, the Waterford Crystal hand sanitizer dispensers, Sumatran teak cocktail forks, Scotch-infused toothpicks. This is I assume that's real.
Yeah, they exist. Yeah.
I just several times thought this is although Wolfe ultimately sort of celebrated in a weird way that kind of crassness, but just the way that you go about cataloging the absurd excesses of our kind of conspicuous consumption seemed very Wolfe-like.
He was a big influence as well, and one of the great joys was that I'd gotten to know him, and he had said some very nice things about the novels, and we did a event at the Miami Book Fair together and things. I mean, that was just I was completely blown away that he had read the novels, but yeah, that's a sort of, his stuff was a tour de force kind of writing, and it was sustained momentum that all of us wish we could do.
Yeah.
When you sit down, you have bad days. You have days where you just suck, where you just have to throw everything out. It's horrible. But the trick is to dust yourself off and to keep it going for as long as he did. And his were big novels, and just to keep that going, I just thought it was just a marvel of being able to manage that talent, and not just that, but your enthusiasm for your story. Because one of the dangers you've run into is you can get tired of a character, or you can start questioning yourself. Is this story going in the right direction? I mean, and it's hard to go back after a couple hundred pages of manuscript and start doing major changes and fixing up things. So I don't know how he worked. I don't know if he worked from index cards or outlines. I don't know. I know Joe Heller was meticulous as hell about putting everything out there. Writing knowing every twist and turn, which when you read Catch-22 is pretty extraordinary that he could do it. And I don't have that level of organization or focus. I just don't.
Well, why don't you work on that, Carl, and then come back and
I'll
talk
get right
with
on.
us about it next time when it's safe for us to gather in person. Will you come back and talk with us
Absolutely.
again?
I would love nothing. It would be such an honor to actually be out there and come to events like this and meet everybody. I think we all miss it. I think, you bitch about everybody bitches about being on a book tour because it's, um, it's grueling, but at the same time, you miss the sort of the high, the connection that you make directly with your readers and the feedback. Yes. Well, I'll be there. In other words.
Excellent. Sounds good. That's something to look forward to, and hopefully sooner rather than later. I just can't tell you how wonderful an evening this has been as far as I am concerned personally, and I know that our audience has loved it. And thank you, Rand. You are so well prepared and so thoughtful in your questions.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And Carl, thank you so much. I hope that again you'll be part of our circle of writers.
I
now.
will.
And
Thank you again for asking me to do this. This was a real high point for me, and Rand was terrific. Everybody, thank you too, Jen.
Thanks,
terrific.
guys. It was great.
Thank you.
All right.
Cheers.
All right.
And good night. Everybody, thank you so much, and we'll see you maybe tomorrow night and at our gala, and check out marktwainhouse.org for more of our programs. And let's give Rand and Carl another round of applause, please.
Yay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, guys.
Good night. Bye-bye.